All right, we're recording. So I guess, do you want to say your name and the date?
Lynel Gardner, September 17th.
Awesome. And so I guess just to start off, where were you born?
I was born in San Francisco, California, January 15th, 1964. And my brother was born January 15th, 1963.
What's your brother's name?
Lamont Gardner. My family, back when I was a kid or baby, French names were very popular for babies. So most of my siblings have French names. Like my name is Lynel, but because I lived in America, it became Lynel. So I'm stuck with an Americanized French name.
I feel like that probably happens to a lot of people.
Yeah, right.
How long did you live in San Francisco?
Well, unfortunately, my mom and dad kind of had a shotgun wedding. My mom had my brother at 15. She had me at 16. And so they were high school sweethearts that get together, and she got pregnant too soon. And so I grew up originally in East Palo Alto and Hunters Point. And because of the youth of my parents, my great uncle, great aunt raised me and my brother. And they also raised my mom. So my great aunt and uncle were pretty old when they raised us. And so I went to Brentwood middle school. And because of the violence that was occurring in East Palo Alto in the 60s, I mean, I had a gang. I had to have a gang to get to school and get back to school, get back from school. And because of the violence that was occurring in East Palo Alto in the late 60s, my great uncle decided to move to Mountain View. So we were one of the first African American families in the South Bay at that time. Originally, East Palo Alto was a completely all-white community. And then my grandfather was a GI, and he bought 31 homes in East Palo Alto, and then moved his black friends into the white community. And then there was, with the promise that if they were going to sell the house, they had to sign the house back to him. So because of my grandfather's GI Bill, East Palo Alto became segregated. And then they had what is called white flight, and the idea that if black people move in, the property value will go down. So that's why eventually white people moved out to move out of the East Palo Alto area. And then, like I said, we moved to Mountain View, and then I went to Mountain View High School, and I went to Archbishop Mitty High School and St. Lawrence Academy growing up. Played ball, baseball, football, played against Barry Bonds, and played baseball and football most of my life. My dad became a pimp, and my mom became a prostitute. So that had a detrimental effect on me personally, emotionally, and but it was it helped me to escape into writing and acting and art because I needed a way to express myself as a young child. So I escaped into art and books. So I was a prolific reader and writer when I was in middle school. And that's what kind of honed my skill to become a professional artist. Then my mom decided when she got herself off, she was a heroin addict. When she got herself off of heroin, she decided she wanted to raise her kids again. So she took us from our great aunt and uncle when I was in the 4th grade, and we moved to Santa Clara. And that's when I went to Mitty and St. Lawrence Academy. And I moved in with my mom and her new husband, who was Sicilian, and unfortunately he was physically abusive, and he was had the highest kill count in his platoon in Vietnam, so he had some issues. So I lived in Santa Clara until, even though my mom got off the heroin, she actually became a pill popper and an alcoholic. So by my sophomore year at Midi, I decided that I had enough, so I moved back to Mountain View and finished my high school education at Mountain View High School at my great aunt uncle's house. My family's British. We're Apache on my dad's side, Cherokee on my mom's side, and African American. So my great grandparents were British, Radcliffe out of Yorkshire. I think at least 70% of Black people in America are of mixed race. So I have that legacy, and it's taken me a long time to embrace it, because I grew up in the era of the civil rights era. So it was more an era of Black power and Black is beautiful. But at the same time, my grandmother was white. So living in East Palo Alto, it's like, who's that white woman? The kids in middle school would say, who's that white lady living at your house? And I was like, you mean my grandmother? Because when you're young, you don't have a concept of color, So she was just Grandma Pocahontas to us, So once I came back to Mountain View and graduated in Mountain View, the tech industry, I worked at Xerox Corporation. I was the inventory control person and shipping receiving at Xerox Park in Mountain View, and I went to Foothill College, and then decided that the culture of Mountain View was changing from art, music, and performance, street performance, to tech, and a lot of the industry. The art industry, film industry was changing. So I moved to LA in 1989 to become a cinematographer. And right when I went to an audition and got into a performance group called the Hittite Empire, an all-Black male performance art group. And we started the second coming of the avant-garde movement in Los Angeles. And there were two avant-garde movements in America, 60s, and then I was part of the new avant-garde in LA in the late 80s, and that avant-garde movement in LA became global, became basically marketable, and became global. So then stayed in LA for 5 years, and then came back to Mountain View to take care of my great uncle, who fell ill with diabetes and lost his leg to diabetes. So I've been here since I've been here since 2000. Excuse me. Let me correct that. I came back in '94, right? And been back ever since. So I think that's the short version. I'm still an artist, still a writer, filmmaker. I've written a play that I toured to the UK and London, and I have about 3 books right now on Amazon. So that's the short version, I think.
Wow.
I wrote a play about my father called Stories I Never Told My Father, and I started that play. In the play, I played myself as 5 years old, and I grow up in the play until adulthood within the play, and that's what I toured through the UK. So, and I work at the senior center currently as a maintenance in Los Gatos, and I work at the rec center and I do maintenance for the rec center in Los Gatos. I worked in Los Gatos since the 80s. I was a limousine driver back in the 80s in Los Gatos. I lived in Saratoga for 20 years on Sobey Road, and yeah, that's kind of the short version.
I wanted to ask, do you know why your uncle chose Mountain View?
Because my great aunt worked at Stanford. She was a nurse. We were actually going to move to Los Altos, California, back in the 70s, but my great aunt got into a car accident and was injured, so he didn't want to have her drive from Los Altos to Stanford Hospital for work. So that's why we ended up moving to Mountain View back then.
Okay. And I was also interested, I can't remember exactly who it was who bought the 31 homes in East Palo Alto.
My dad's dad, my grandfather, my dad's son.
Your grandfather.
Yeah, he was a GI.
That's a pretty significant historical moment, I think, for East Palo Alto.
Yeah, it was. You know, that was the only way we can get the housing. You know, that was the first generation that was able to move out of this. You know, because Hunters Point was a shipping back in the day. So the greatest immigration of America was the immigration from the South to the West, with the promise of shipbuilding jobs. And so, but the thing about the North is covert racism, and the South is overt racism. So even though my great uncle, who worked the coal mines in West Virginia for 20 years, worked for United Steel for 20 years, and then even though he had degrees, had to start at United Airlines as a janitor, and worked from a janitor to eventually becoming shop foreman for the jet engineering department. So he was a shop foreman that built the jet engines for United Airlines. And if it wasn't for his GI Bill, Palo Alto would still be white.
What was his name?
His name was Herbert Ganaway.
I just wanted to make sure we got that because I didn't know if I caught that earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's quite a storied history.
You know what's funny is I just met a gentleman in Los Gatos like 3 days ago who was part of that generation that was in East Palo Alto when it was white, and he's a resident of Los Gatos now, and I met him in the park there in front of the post office, and he said that his dad was a civil rights activist and stayed in East Palo Alto, kept his homes in East Palo Alto, and decided to stay in East Palo Alto and not be caught up in the white flight. And he ended up being keeping his homes, moving out of East Palo Alto, but renting to black families to this day, because he felt he saw the plight of black people and decided to help them. And so it wasn't just my grandfather. There were actually white families in East Palo Alto that helped black people and black families fight segregation. So, I mean, I'm also a documentarian, so I'm going to interview him about that story, because a lot of black people don't know about how the suburbs were able to integrate, and don't know that it wasn't just civil rights movement wasn't just about black people striving to get ahead. It was also other people helped us get to that place. And so I want to kind of interview him so we can I could kind of bring that history into play, you know.
Yeah, it's an important moment because it probably that white flight probably also cemented some of the more racist policies that we know went into effect in Palo Alto itself.
Yeah, the redlining and also the unsaid redlining that's still happening with some of the brokers there in Los Gatos, who are keeping the main downtown area white. You know, those that live around the downtown areas of Los Gatos are generally white families. That happens around the United States. Because I know I have friends that work for Allen Pinnell and a lot of these brokers, and if you're of color and you want a house, they will not show you a house around the downtown area. They'll show you a house on the outskirts of Los Gatos, and the clients will go to them and say, if you sell to people of color, we won't tell our friends to come to your establishment. I mean, my best friend was one of the brokers for Allen Pinnell. She would tell me these stories. So it's still happening today.
Yeah, I think that's it seems to be one of the issues with kind of tracking racist policies and lending and things in Los Gatos is that there's not a huge paper trail, and it's hard to find any like redlining maps specifically.
No, it's all unsaid right now. I mean, redlining is illegal, but the practice still exists. See what I'm saying? And then when people want to move out, rather than have a white person, a black person, or a person of color buy the house, they'll move their friends into the house and give them and not list the house. And even though these families are barely scraping by, that they let live in their house, they just want to keep it white. So
yeah. I wanted to ask a little bit about, you mentioned you have Cherokee and Apache background.
right.
How have you been able to, do you have a connection with that part of the family, and how did you?
Well, my great grandmother, Pocahontas was her name, and she was off the reservation in South Carolina. But her and my dad, it's funny, as a kid, I would go by my dad's mother's house, and she was called Big Mama. Sometimes in black community and even in tribal communities, just because someone's called Big Mama doesn't mean that's your mama. It's just that she's the one that takes care of all the kids. So she's given that moniker Big Mama because she's everyone's mama. Because you have these kids that get married, have kids out of wedlock. And so they're still kids themselves. And so Big Mama is known, that's where you take your kids when you're trying to get by, trying to, scrape everything you can together to pay the rent, to get food on the table. As a young kid, you're not really responsible. So you send your kid to Big Mama's house. So that was my great grandmother, who was Apache. And then 30 years later, it's funny, I was looking at some old pictures on my grandmother's wall, and I said, who's that white guy in that photo right there next to Big Mama, my grandmother? She said, and then my cousin told me, oh, that's your grandfather. I'm like, what? So nobody talked about this guy. I go, well, why does he look white? He goes, oh, he's not white, he's Apache. And he actually raped my grandmother and took off after that. And my name is Lynel Gardner, but my name should be Lynel Spain, because that was his name. And my grandfather, his son, Mr. Spain's son, my grandfather, hated his dad, right? So my grandmother ended up marrying Mr. Gardner, my grandfather's stepdad. And so eventually my grandfather felt more, I guess, because he was raised by Mr. Gardner, he eventually changed his name to Bill, from Bill Spain to Bill Gardner. So my name is by default, my name is Lynel Gardner, but it should be Lynel Spain in the Apache name. And on my grandmother's side, because you see in the African American community, we think that if we have any white in us, it has something to do with slavery. So we don't talk about. There's a lot of shame in that. So if you have any white blood, ethnicity, it must mean you were a slave. But that's not the case in my family. So my mom's side, Grandma Pocahontas, was her parents were British, and my grandmother's surname before she married was Radcliffe, which is a derivative of Radcliffe, which is a Yorkshire family. So we're from the Yorkshire of Great Britain. But when you're during the Civil Rights Movement, you had the Black Panthers, you had SNCC, you had NAACP. They all had different ideologies, but at the same time, they had because of those ideologies, they had different needs. So in order to unite, when it comes to getting political, getting in terms of politics and getting things done and getting provided for as a community, we combined it into being Negro or being Black. That way we were kind of united under the same flag, because then then SNCC would get their money, then the pot would be split, right? And then Black Panthers would get their money from government, and NAACP would get their piece of the pie, and it wouldn't be enough for everyone. So through the Black Power movement, we kind of united under Black Power. So those that were mixed, like my family that was of mixed ethnicities, we were kind of clumped into the same Black Power struggle, rather than going, wait, we're part Indian, we're part white, we're part this, we're part that. And also there's a issue with, I don't know if you know the history of the Indian campaign, but it wasn't the white soldiers that ended the Indian campaign. It was the Buffalo Soldiers. The Buffalo Soldiers were a Black Indian regiment that were the toughest regiment in the army. Even the army was afraid of the Buffalo Soldiers, and the Indians called them Buffalo Soldiers because they were tough. So it was the Buffalo Soldiers that killed most of the Indians. So there's a lot of animosity between Black Indians and the tribes, the national tribes, because of that history. So it's taken me a while to try to get into the nation because of that animosity of the past of the Buffalo Soldiers. So Black Indians were not allowed until recently to get into the tribes, the nation of the Cherokee Nation or the Apache Nation.
Was that something that your family talked about when you were younger, or is this more things that you found out as you were older? There was a lot of shame in the Black, because see, Black people were already getting abused for being Black, and then you're a Black Indian, so it's like a double-sided sword, right? Indians weren't even considered in the census. They were like the invisible people. So, and then you had white blood in you, possibly white ethnicity in you. So we were in my family, it was like, you got to be ashamed of the whiteness in you, you got to be ashamed of the Indian in you, you got to be ashamed of the Black in you. So for a long time, we denied that, the white, and we denied the Indian. But we look different. My dad just doesn't even look Black. So, I mean, it's almost like, what do they call it? The invisible man syndrome, like a dual personality. We had a duality that we had as a family, because at one hand we were saying we were Black, but at the same time my grandmother looked white. So, or my mom, she had red hair, because Cherokee. I had red hair when I was a kid. My mom had red hair, and that's a known Cherokee trait, is red hair and bright eyes. So it was unusual for us coming up. How was your experience in in middle school and high school in Mountain View? Did you feel, I guess, how did that feel going to school? What were you
Well,
friends
when I
with?
moved, when I was in middle school in East Palo Alto, everybody was, "What's up, blood? What's up, fam? What's up, cuz? What's up, sister?" There was still a lot of black pride. "What's up, brother?" When I moved to Mountain View, where I was like one of two or three black people in the classroom, that was the first time I heard nigger. You know, when I went to Therakoff and when I went to St. Lawrence, I was one of maybe two in the whole middle school. When I went to Midi, I was maybe one or two in the whole high school. And so when you don't have a lot of your own people around you, you have to take a lot of shit. You know, you don't have a father around. And my great uncle was so old that he couldn't be like, yeah, I would leave the home, but I wouldn't have his presence in the world. Like when it came to parent teacher conference, I didn't really have, I mean, my aunt and uncle went, but they weren't really in my life outside the house. So it was hard being the only black kid that had to take the abuse. I'll give you an example. I was in St. Lawrence, and a new black kid moved in. Came to the school, became a student of St. Lawrence. So that made three, and three black kids total. And my white friend said, "Oh, there's the new nigger," and I was like, "What? What?" And I was like, "Wait, if he's a nigger, what am I?" You know, it's like, and I look just like, I mean, I'm black, you know, I look more like him than I do my white friends. And then my friends turned to me and said, "Don't worry, Lynel, you're one of us." And I was like, "What?" So it was like that duality kind of thing, you know, it's like, wait, he's a nigger, but I'm your friend and I'm not a nigger, but I'm one of us. I look more like him than I do you. So it was like, that went on throughout then I would, through seventh and eighth and ninth grade, I was chased by this one white kid that was a racist, who would try to beat me up every day. That's every day for 3 years. He would wait for me at school every day for 3 years. In seventh, eighth, and ninth grade. Luckily, my older brother, was in a grade above me, and was always protecting me from him. So yeah, it was difficult. It was humiliating when you can't defend yourself when somebody speaks ill of you or your family. So it was really difficult for me growing up mixed race, and took a lot of abuse. Yeah, until I learned how to fight.
Is that something that you think drove you to learning to fight and things? Did you feel like did you feel like you had to fight a lot in like high school?
Yeah, I had to because my dad was a big time drug dealer, and my dad was a genius. He was gift to gab, power to control, manipulate, but because black people of his generation, black men of his generation, couldn't get jobs, you know, they had to do what they had to do to survive. So unfortunately, he was a genius. So it became a global thing for him. So he got so big where he didn't have time for his kids. So, but I had to learn how to fight because no one was going to be able to defend me. So so I started out in judo, and then boxing, and then jujitsu. And once I had a reputation of a person that could defend himself, the word got around, and then most people left me alone after a while. My teacher taught Bruce Lee jiu-jitsu, and I was doing jiu-jitsu before it became trendy as it is today. So I was pretty lucky in that way. I learned how to really fight and defend myself with a real practical martial art. And then I started using it to defend those that were being abused by bigger people at my high school or in life. I always defended the weak because I was once in that position, you know. So yeah, learning how to fight in sports helped a lot too, because I was able to have more freedom of expression through art, acting, sports. I found a vehicle for expressing my self without limitation in sports and art and acting and writing.
How did you feel in your classrooms and with your teachers?
Oh, the thing about teachers, most of the teachers when I was growing up were white male, white female. So if you think about the institution of racism, they grew up in learning racist, having racist tendencies themselves. So they would see me in a different light as other kids, because all they knew about black people was what they were taught. And so even though they were educated, teachers and very educated and had degrees, they had racist tendencies, how they spoke to me, how they treated me, their expectations of me. They didn't know me, but they knew what they knew was what they were told about the black community and black people. And so it was very rare to find a teacher that saw me as a human being, like maybe one or two in my life. And those that did see me as a human being could look past my color and see my talents, my strengths. And I'm an artist today because of Mrs. Hinckley, who was white at St. Lawrence, who knew whenever she said who would like to read, I'd raise my hand and I'd read for the class. And then she was the one that said, Lynel, you ever heard of Martin Luther King Jr.? And I was, what, 7th grade? What are you, 12? I'm like, no, who's that? And she said, because you're a very strong reader and a very strong, you're articulate, you're very articulate, I'm gonna create a elocution contest where every student played a famous person, and I was supposed to play Martin Luther King Jr. and I was going to do I Have a Dream speech, and I was up against Eleanor Roosevelt, FDR, and all these other kids that were playing these other characters, and the parents were invited to the contest, and at the end of my speech I got a standing ovation from all the parents. And I did not know she could see. She's one of those rare teachers that could see the talent in her students, and bring it out. And because of her, I became world famous, a world famous performance artist. And up until the day she died, I called her to thank her for all she did for me, because I wouldn't be where I was if it wasn't for her seeing that in me, seeing past my color. And even in sports, most of the coaches in sports were white males, and all they knew about black kids were they were dangerous and unruly, and so, like for instance, Barry Bonds. I played against Barry Bonds, but we were better. I was better than Barry Bonds. But the problem with the thing about Barry Bonds was, most kids his age, black kids, didn't have fathers. Okay, so Barry Bonds' father was Bobby Bonds, who was a Hall of Famer baseball player, and Barry Bonds' godfather was Willie Mays. So when a white coach wanted to talk to me about my swing, or wanted to help me with my batting or my fielding, he couldn't talk to me. Most coaches couldn't talk to a black kid because they thought there was a cultural barrier because of my ethnicity, or black kids' ethnicity, or people of color's ethnicity. So I didn't have that link between, like with Barry, they could go, let me talk to Bobby, and then Bobby can talk to Barry about his swing. Bobby, Barry, and Willie Mays. That way the white coach, who felt that he couldn't communicate to Barry as a black kid, could have that link. So with me, if the coach wanted to talk to me about my swing, he had no link between cultural link or cultural ambassador between me and a coach, because my great uncle didn't come outside and go to my games, right? My dad didn't go to my games, so there was no cultural link or ambassador between the coach and me. So Barry was fortunate, even though we played Barry in the semifinals at Stanford, Sunken Diamond, and he went 0 for 4. We knew he wasn't the best, but he had that culture, he had that link between his father and the coach. And because his father was a Hall of Famer, there was that connection. He had that connection politically. So that's why some kids made it to the show, to the pros, and some black kids didn't, because they didn't have that link like Barry had. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting. Yeah, you don't think a lot about the kids who went off to be stars and how they got there. Because he was local, same with like Tom Brady, right?
Yeah, he was San Carlos All-Stars, we were Mountain View All-Stars.
Yeah, that's interesting. You mentioned that you worked at Xerox and you highlighted that. I was wondering what that experience was like, because I know people's experience in tech is always different. Yeah, I was wondering what that job was like.
Well, I was responsible for like 3,000 employees. I'm always, my work ethic I got from my great uncle. Even though he was a black Indian, he was an alcoholic, but he was a functional alcoholic. Like he could go to work all week, but on weekends he would fall down drunk, right? So, but I got my work ethic from him because, like I said, he was in the coal mines for 20 years, United Steel for 20 years, United Airlines for 20 years. So he was from that generation where you had to be on time. You know, you had to look somebody in the eye when you spoke to them. You had to have a firm handshake when you shook somebody's hand. You never were late. If you're going to be, you'd rather be early than late. So I got a lot of that work ethic from him. So I enjoyed going to work and watching him. My uncle in middle school, when I went to school, I was like, it was like going to work. So I got a lot of that from him, work ethic from him. Xerox itself was, you know, even though it was 3,000 employees, there was like 2 black people there. It was like one was a scientist, researcher, and it was me. So my office manager was racist. So I had to deal with racist jokes all day, every day. For the 4 years that I was there, harassment. Also, you have to deal with the fact that white women look at you as a sexual object rather than a human being. You know, they look at you as like a mandingo or something. But I dealt with a lot of that with white women in corporate world, that they saw me more as a sexual being rather than a human being. So I guess that was my Me Too movement kind of moment, is being seen as someone that white women want to be. How can I put it? I'll put it how trying to put it in a way that makes sense. Yeah, just being seen as this exotic other. That's the word. So I had a lot of that in the corporate world, where I wasn't seen as fully human, you know, balanced, and I was seen as kind of like an animal, you know. So it was hard. The corporate world was hard like that. And then just always being, even though I did my job, it was never enough. You know, it was never good enough. And that happened in sports too, where what some of my my teammates, they were just as rambunctious and you know, they were just as unruly as I was, but I got the brunt of all of the abuse. You know, it's like, wait, you think you think it's like they know you before they know you. It's like because of how they perceive black people, they never got to see me, even though I was one of the best cornerbacks in the league. Um, I was always seen as the troublemaker, but some of my white teammates were doing just the same exact thing I was doing, but worse. But they never think about black kids because of that assumption that we're dangerous or we're unruly. We'll get less chances than a white kid would. You know, like 2 strikes, I'm out. But white kids are always let off the hook. You know, like for instance, some of my teammates were on bennies, which is like white. It's like uppers. So they were always off sides because they were always, you know, jumpy. So, but I mess up once and I'm on the sidelines. You know what I'm saying? So that's been that way my whole life. You know, it's like it's and that's why the prison system is full of people of color, and because there's always hope for white kids, but there's no hope for black kids. You know what I'm saying? So.
What would you say pushed you to go to LA? I guess what was the
Driving force.
Yeah, driving force to go to.
I've never really, I've always been a performer, even when it's part of my personality. My dad was an artist, musician, painter. Like I said, he had the gift of gab. All these traits that my dad had, the ability to move people, even even though he was a drug dealer, it was a different. See, today, most drug dealers, they don't grow up in a life. You know, they don't. It's just about the money. My dad's day was you had to do what you had to do to get by. But my dad was a Marine. He had a life. He was an electrician. He was a father. I mean, he was a community activist. Most of the dealers today, they're just kingpins. They're just drug dealers. They don't have no life. So the thing about me was I was afraid to use my dad's traits because I thought it was going to lead to a negative life, you know, rather than embracing it. So I had to figure out how to embrace it. And the more I got into the arts, like I would entertain people. I'll give you an example. I would just to get attention, I would drag my leg in front of an audience of people at the park, and they'd go, "Oh, poor guy, poor kid," and then 5 minutes later, I'd run by, like, "What? It's a miracle!" Right? So I realized I had ability to entertain, or I would do a skit in class where I'd have a pretend oven, and I would put a fake pie in the front of it, and I had my friend in the back to put a real pie in the back part of the oven, and when the bell rang, the cooking timer rang, I would pull out a real pie from the front of it. So they go, "Wow!" So I always had this natural knack for entertainment, but that was my dad's trait that he wasn't able to use because of racism. And I became more and more conscious of that in college, where I would get ready to do a speech in my Spanish class, and before I said anything, I had everyone's attention. I was like, "What is that?" And that was my dad's ability to command attention. That was my trait that I wasn't able to acknowledge because I was still angry at my father for not being in my life. And so the more and more I had those experiences, the more I realized, wait, am I an entertainer? How can I use these traits for good and not evil? And also at the same time, the tech industry was kicking in, and in 1989, and I didn't see a place for me in the tech world, and at that time I had stopped going to Xerox, working at Xerox, because I saw what climbing the corporate ladder did to people. You know, people were having heart attacks every week, you know, and I didn't want to be a part of the corporate world. And so I took a acting class at Foothill, and I found that I could be free on stage. I could free my imagination. And my great uncle said, get it. He was always like, when I turned 18, get a job. You need to get a job. You need to do this. You need to be this. You need to be a doctor. You need to be a lawyer. You need to do this. I said, wait. I went to a stage play at American Conservatory Theater, and it was this play about a radio show. And there was a doctor, there was a lawyer in it, there was a guy playing a captain in it. And I said, wait, I can answer my uncle's question, my great uncle's question. I can be a doctor, I can be a husband, I can be a lawyer, I can be this and that as an actor. And that would appease my great uncle. I said, you need to be a doctor. I am. I'm a doctor on stage every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Come and see my show. So I found a muse that I could use my dad's traits, which was gift of gab, ability to command attention, manipulate my audience, command my audience, use my gift of gab, use my ability to control my audience, and they could leave at the end of the show, and it was a safe place for both me and my audience. So I went to LA because I felt that I've started to get in touch with that side of my dad that was the artist, that he couldn't, in his generation, he couldn't manifest because of the situation of what was happening in the world during that time, where Black men were still not able to get a job. And I saw a place where I could become that person, that artist that he wasn't able to become. And that's when I went to LA and wanted to become, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention, I went to ACT. I got a scholarship to go to ACT, American Conservatory Theater, before I left. And I wanted to see let me see if I can make this artistic thing or this acting thing work in LA. And with $25 in my pocket, I went to LA to try to see if I can use this art to get into film school, because I wanted to be a filmmaker. And then the first play that I got into went national, international. So I got into a hit play, and my first play was a hit play. So, and the rest was history.
How was that experience being on that big of a play?
It was a lot at my being young and having sold out Broadway. I mean, I sold out the Lincoln Center in one day. Mark Taper, you know, it was funny. It took a while because still Black people in the art world, they're not considered, it's considered, oh, you're just natural. You're natural entertainers. Rather than, no, we have to work at it like everybody else. There's a technique to acting. So we're not taken seriously in Los Angeles as Black men. And for us, whenever there's an audition, a paid audition in LA, thousands of people show up for it. So, and if, I'll give you an example, I was asked to come in, because there's not a lot of people go to LA to be famous and become rich. A lot of them aren't artists. They're not real actors, right? So I'm not starstruck. So I walked up to William Dafoe in the bookstore one day, and he was carrying all these acting books, and he had just won the Academy Award for Born on the 4th of July, the movie with Tom Cruise. And I said, hey man, why are you carrying all these acting books? You just won the Academy Award. He goes, I'm always learning. And I said, there's like 10% of true artists in LA that have that kind of work ethic. It's their passion, and the rest of LA are going there because they want to be famous and they want to be rich. So I was one of those artists who, it was about my craft and my passion. So I was always able to I have the longevity, right? So when our play, what we did was we understood the market of LA. LA is all about trends, right? It's all about the market trend. So whatever the trend was, if it was Jeeps, everybody had a Jeep. If it was hairstyle, everybody had the same hairstyle with certain kind of clothing. Everybody was wearing a certain kind of clothing. So we wanted to create something. Nobody can be you, right? There's only one you in the world, right? So we said, let's do our own stories, because nobody could tell our story. And so we found our own lane for our own niche market. And so understanding the market of LA, we went against traditional theater. We went against Broadway. We went against Mark Taper, Lincoln Center. Traditionally, when you have a hit play, you extend it because it's show business. You want to make more money. So understanding the market of LA, we said, LA is about trends. So what we would do is we would sell out and we close the show. So our shows became more of a happening than a traditional theater. It became more of a happening or experience than a traditional theater a show. So what would happen was people would go, hey, did you go? We were called the Hittite Empire. So people would go, did you go see the Hittites last week? In LA, they'd go like, even if they didn't see it, they go, yeah, it was cool, man. It was cool, because they want to be part of the trend. But then that person didn't see the show, was going to go, the next thing they would do was find out when the next Hittite show would be. So they'd search and search and search. So so we'd open up in Pasadena, sell out, close. Then we'd not say anything about where our next show would be. We'd open up in Culver City, sell out, close. We'd open up in Hollywood, sell out, close. Beverly Hills, sell out, close. Pasadena, sell out, close. To the point where it got so trendy, and because LA is about, people whisper, they don't tell you how great you are, because LA's spoiled, because they've had the James Deans, they've had the De Niro's, they've had the Meryl Streeps, and they're like, who the hell are you? We're LA. Who are you? Who are you guys? So we became so trendy that, again, we'd sell out before we even came to a time where we would sell out before we even opened, to the point where we didn't really know we were famous until we said we were going to be at the Lincoln Center, and the next day it was sold out. That's when we realized we were famous. So the LA experience was interesting, and being famous at 25, 23 was hard, because at that age you don't really know your identity. And we went from a base in the market. You understand that it's show business. So the industry, even the LA Times, some of the major national papers, New York Times, they when they reviewed us, they would say we were amateurish because we weren't marketable yet. But the minute we became the status quo, LA Times front page, New York Times front page. Now I got to really understand that, it's not about talent. It's about business, right? Because we were still doing the stuff when we became famous. We had done that stuff in the beginning that was considered amateurish, right? But now it's because when you create a base audience, because you have a base audience, which is your audience finds you, you find your audience, and that audience becomes your base audience. That audience is like, the Hittites are saying what I want to say. Those kind of people. The Hittites, they're helping me grow. They help me understand who I am. That's your base audience. And what happens is the market, the industry goes, wow, their patrons, let's say the Mark Taper, for example, their patrons hear about us. They come to our show. They go, when are the Hittites coming to the Mark Taper? Or when are the Hittites come to the Lincoln Center? They go, oh, they'll be here. Oh yeah, they'll be here. Don't worry, they're gonna be. They'll be in the calendar. They don't know who the Hittites are, but they're gonna find out who we are. So they'll go scouting for us, and they'll send their scouts out, and they'll go to Hittite show, and they'll say, wow, there's like 2,000 people here. We need to. This is a market. We need to tap into this market. So instead of giving us money to help us produce the show, they'll create a performance around the Hittites at their venue and bring in, so they don't lose their patrons. You see what I'm saying? Their patrons will still come to the Mark Taper or the Lincoln Center and see the Hittites, rather than the Hittites taking all their business away. That's what happened. So it's show business, and it kind of like, oh, I get it. Because at a time, well, let's say the market was Tom Cruise, like Tom Cruise in LA. He was the #1 box office actor. So if you weren't Tom Cruise in the industry, the market didn't want to take a chance with you because you weren't marketable. So if you weren't Tom Cruise-ish, you couldn't get a job. Even in the industry in LA is overshadowed by the industry. So you're going to have, even in a restaurant, you're going to have a Tom Cruise-ish looking host or waiters or whatever, because the industry runs the market. Is the industry, LA's industry driven. So if bald heads were in, if the market was bald heads and you weren't a bald headed actor, you could be the greatest actor in the world. But if you didn't have a bald head, you couldn't get any work in LA. So we had to create our own market and create our own trend. That's what happened with us.
Yeah, and it seems like that was successful too. I
the
guess
problem was success is hard to handle, because at that age, when they're asking you what color limousine do you want, how much money do you want, it gets some of us, it gets to their heads, and that's what ended up splintering the groups, because after a while you realize, oh, the people that are in the group, some of us are in it for the money and the fame, and some of us are in it for the art. So I was one of those that were in it for the art. So I branched off and did my one-man show so I can continue to grow as an artist. And those that wanted it for the fame, they stayed in the group. So go ahead. I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
No worries. How was that one-man show? How did that
come
to be?
My dad, I finally got, so my dad got out of prison, and he said his only regret was he didn't get to know his children. And that part of me there's a certain part of me that at age 14 or 15, I said, I got to stop waiting for my father to be part of my life and move on without him. But I basically suppressed my childhood, my entire childhood. Because in my childhood, there was pain and suffering and neglect. And I pushed all that down so I could focus on moving forward. But I never came face to face with that hurt child in me. And so when my dad said I never got to know my kids, that's my only regret. That part of my psyche awakened. And that's when I created, originally it was called Black Son, No Father, and wrote from the child's perspective, because I never allowed myself to face that child until he said that. And that's when I started communicating with that child self. And what I noticed when it came to like documentaries about families or movies about families, they never interviewed a child. You know, they never, what is the child feeling right now? Even the child may not be articulating or be able to have the ability to understand what's happening, but he's feeling what's happening. You know, he's having his own experiences. So I decided that I wanted to be the first person to write a story from a child's perspective. So I started, let me start to play at 5 years old and then grow up in the play. And what it is I wanted to use which is a traditional way of articulating from the Black church, which is called call and response. So I wanted to, like in a church, the preacher goes, "Can I get an amen?" And the congregation goes, "Amen." That's call and response, right? So I wanted to create a performance where there was no fourth wall, because most of our work as the Hittite Empire in my group, we broke the fourth wall. Most of performance art, I was part of performance art. Traditionally, it's like the Blue Men group. You ever heard of them? So that's where painters became living art. They stopped painting. This was in the 60s and 70s. They stopped painting on canvases and became living art. But back then, performance artists could just sit there and scratch their head, and the audience would just walk around and go, "Why is that guy scratching his head?" They didn't have to communicate. But because the LA riots that polarized the whole city, performance artists had to break the fourth wall and communicate, because the artists are social commentators, right? So if LA is, the communities are all polarized, they can't speak to one another. So I was part of the new school of performance art where you had to break the fourth wall and communicate to the audience directly. And so that's what I wanted to do with this performance, was create a sacred space where I could talk to the audience, because I couldn't talk to my dad or my mom because they were on drugs. my great uncle and aunt because they were alcoholics. So my grandmother told us she was an alcoholic. So I wanted to have the kid and the little Lynel communicate to the audience, right, and be that kind of like to take the place of my parents and have the kid speak directly to the audience. And what it did was that process was it took the audience, because traditional acting, the actors talk to each other. They rarely break the fourth wall. And the audience can look at each other. Oh, isn't that funny? You know, you can look at the person on each side and go, oh, that was a good scene, right? But when you break the fourth wall, or I'll bring the audience into the space, I'll take them from their seat into my space, they can't turn away. So they have to engage. So, and I also incorporated a Q&A at the end of the performance where I come out and I do a Q&A. So because of my Hittite connections, I made a connection to the UK. We did a performance as a Hittites at the, it was called the, what was it called? ICA in London. Institute of Contemporary Art in London. Because of that connection in the past, they called me and asked me if I had any new work. And I said, yeah, I got a play called The Stories I Never Told My Father, A Black Son and Father. And they set up a 5-city tour of London, sponsored by British Airways, and I took my one-man show to the UK. So I've actually done it in the UK. I've never done it. I've only done it once in the United States, but it's an American play. And then I picked up a couple, while there, I got invited to perform it at the National Festival of Belgium and the National Festival of Scotland. So, and I did the first Black History Month in Belgium, in the history of the country. And I said, where are the other, usually you go to a festival and there's like other artists. I go, okay, I ended up at the Belgian festival. Where are the other artists? I want to meet the other artists. They go, no, you're the artist. I'm like, what? So I got the front page of the national paper of Belgium. I got the front page of I got the national radio of Belgium because I was the only Black artist. So, and then I did BBC radio live in London, and yeah, it was a great experience. But the food in London is terrible, and the weather in Belgium is unbelievably. It's so cold. They had the worst blizzard in the history of Belgium when I was there, so I didn't get out much. But and the British audience, they don't emote. They keep everything inside. So as coming from America where everybody emotes, it was hard to gauge what my audience was feeling because they're so in their head, you know, the British. So
yeah, that's interesting. It's interesting probably the experience that you had between living here in the United States and being in Europe. I'm sure it was pretty different.
Yeah, because you talk about Wonder Bread, and they're like, "What's Wonder Bread?" You know, it's like in my play, you know, right? Making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. So it's like, what did they get? And what didn't they get? You know, so.
I was wondering,
there's a lot of racism in still in Europe and in London. I dealt with a lot of that.
Yeah, it must have been kind of difficult, at least performing in front of crowds that were also probably largely white.
Yeah, like I said, you got to remember that the British, some of the towns there were slave ports, and British. I mean, I couldn't get a taxi in Piccadilly Circus, right? I couldn't, even though they had a queue. The cabs, you know, if you're at the front of the queue, you're supposed to be the next in line, but the cabbies would not. They would stop and only pick up white people in the queue, no matter where they were in the queue, even if we were there at the front of the queue. And the thing about it was I learned a lot about white privilege is everybody know who's in the queue, who's in the middle, who's in the front, who's in the back. So when the white Brits or the white tourists, when the cab would stop for them and everybody knew that wasn't the queue, front of the queue, they would look at us at the front of the queue every time and go, that guy's at the, you see that look on their face like, this ain't fair. But get in the 99.9% of the time, they get in the cab anyway. That's called white privilege. That's why it never stops, because it's convenient. There's perks. We had to eventually, and it started snowing, and we had to eventually jump into the cab because we wanted to, there was a lot of black women, black Brits who were women, they weren't stopping for either. So my group is like 9 of us, right? So we said, okay, we got to get these black women home. So the cab, we finally realized the cabbies weren't going to stop for black people. So we would, once they opened the door at wherever they were in the queue, we jump in and we get the black woman and we tell the cab, you better take this woman where they want to go, or we're going to kick your ass. And then that's how we did all night. And then eventually we would get our artistic director, who was white. We'd have her stand outside and the cab would stop for her, and then we'd jump in to get home back to the hotel. So people who say, oh, you know, these protests shouldn't be this way and it shouldn't be that way, sometimes there's a reason where you have to, it comes to a certain extent where you have to be forceful, because we don't want to freeze to death. So you have to, it becomes extreme. It's not like we're just throwing rocks at windows. No, it's led to that. It's led to us having to jump into a cab because we don't want to freeze to death, and we have to do what we have to do to survive. So there's a story. There's levels to that shit, you know.
Definitely,
people don't understand that. They just see violence on television. They go, look at those violent people.
Definitely. So I guess when you came back up here to the Bay, what led you to get work in Los Gatos? I'm wondering how you ended up around Los Gatos.
Now remember, Los Gatos in the 80s was when you went to Santa Cruz, that was the way station before you went. Now was the way station when you came back from Santa Cruz. You know, it's really quiet town now, but in the 80s and early 90s, Los Gatos was off the hook. I mean, you had people hanging out in their bikinis and all lined up on Santa Cruz Avenue, hanging out like on the sidewalk, hundreds of people. You had back in the used to be I think there was a bookstore, Barnes and Nobles. I think it was by the cafe there. That was all bars. And you go from bar to bar. You just walk from bar to bar. That whole area was all bars. There was a radio station right on Santa Cruz where the window was facing the street. It was huge. That place was like off the hook. So I was already hanging out. Again, my limo service company, there was a house on the corner of Highway 9 and Santa Cruz. Our limousine service company was right there. So I was limousine driver, driving people from Los Gatos patrons every day for 2 or 3 years, I think. So I was already in Los Gatos back in those days. I was living in Mountain View. I was living I lived all over the peninsula. So I was back. I've been back and forth in Los Gatos since the late 80s. And then I came back, and because my great uncle, I was getting ready to sign with a major Beverly Hills manager. And then my great uncle got sick with diabetes. And at the time, there was no one willing from the family that was willing to take care of him. So on one hand, I was on one hand, I had in this hand superstardom. I'm going to sign with a major manager. And on this hand, my great uncle was sick, who raised me. And I was like, what do I do, you know? And I said, I wouldn't be in this place of superstardom if my great uncle hadn't raised me. So I decided to come back, which I thought was I was going to come back, get him back on his feet, and go back and start my A-list career as a film actor. And but it got worse and worse. And then he lost his leg to diabetes. Then I had to wait for him to recover from that. And then I got to the point where LA, the film industry was going to make the Bay Area Hollywood North. because they were getting pushed out. It was people like in the other cities like Pasadena, Culver City. The novelty of having a film in their city was wearing out. They were tired of the detours, the cables, the trucks. So it was pushing the industry north to San Francisco. That's why they were originally coming. And so I said, why go to LA when the film industry is coming here? So I said, okay, I don't have to go to LA. Then I can continue to help my uncle. And then it got too expensive. They were charging the industry too much to make films, and it was too hard to make a film in San Francisco, because if you're going to cut off half of Market Street to do Metro, the movie Metro with Eddie Murphy, how do you get uptown and downtown without crossing Market Street? You know what I'm saying? So you had the Bay Area community, San Francisco citizens, an uproar. They're being overcharged. So they go, you know what? Let's go to Canada, where they're not going to charge us taxes. Let's go to Florida. Let's go to Atlanta. So they left and just came back after let's see, since 1994, they just got back, because San Francisco has become one of the top tourist cities in the world again, and they want it as a backdrop. That's why they came back to the Bay Area. But so I was stuck. I had stayed too long and taking care of my uncle, so my manager gave up on me. And then I had no film career because the industry left the Bay Area. So I was stuck taking care of my great uncle. That's when I started to work in Los Gatos again, and I worked at a cafe in Los Gatos, and then I started teaching theater. I started teaching martial arts for women at the rec center, and that's where were the first jobs I had coming back.
Wow, how's that experience been, teaching martial arts?
Oh, I love it, because for me, I love teaching. I'm a youth activist, so I use theater as prevention when I'm teaching theater for youth, and then I use martial arts as a way of, it's an art. It's, to me, it's called martial art. So it's an expression. Art is a form of expression. Martial is like military, right? So my particular style, it's offensive and defensive. So what I liked about it was I didn't have to break the bone. I could hold somebody in a lock and tell them to stop fighting, because I'm not that kind of person. I'm not the kind of person that starts fights. And so I found a way to protect myself without hurting people. And then it was offensive and defensive, where some arts are just offensive. It's attack, attack, attack. It's like, wait, the guy was just trying to shake your hand, man. So teaching self-defense for women, I've always looked at women as, if men can learn to unite with women, that's true power. You know what I mean? So I've always been allies for women, because women are treated very badly and have been treated historically. I've been a supporter of the suffrage movement since I was a kid. So I've always wanted to help women to, and that kind of bled over to, transferred over to my martial arts. It's like, I'm gonna help women protect themselves, in society and in their relationships. So I always incorporated helping, battered women. We used to go to teach women self-defense. We go to the homes where women were battered, and then I would teach at the rec center to help women deal with confrontation. And I love this. It's what I believe in, and it's part of who I am, is making sure that women are protected in our society.
Yeah, and it's interesting the way that you can blend some of your background between both the skills of defending yourself and defending people, as well as the art and acting.
Yeah, my particular style, it's about weight differential. It's not about strength. Even if you have strength, you could be benching 500 pounds of weight, because you're so strong you can fight. That doesn't coincide. The the two don't go together. You have to know how to wield that strength, you know. So it was my particular style of jiu-jitsu. It's not about strength. It's about off balancing. It's about weight differential. So when I teach women my particular style, they're surprised at how powerful they can be without having the physical. Like men are more, you know, that we have larger muscles. That's not to say that women can't be just as strong as men, but just the mental, just the fact that women can empower themselves by protecting themselves and not have to have the strength of men to do it was really kind of like it was able to, women were taken aback by that. You know, it's like, wow, I don't need a lot of power or strength, and I could throw a man twice my size, you know. So that was cool. That was the cool thing about it. Empowering women that way. You know?
Yeah. And as someone who's been in Los Gatos, both back in the 80s, and you kind of mentioned what it was like being around town in the 80s versus now, what are some differences and similarities that you see here in town?
Well, like I said, it's more a quiet town. It's more, well, it's become more, it depends on the market. Like sometimes if there's a recession, you'll get, let's say the dollar is weak and the yen is strong. So you'll get a lot of Chinese people moving to, or you get a lot of Russians, or you get a lot of Indians moving to into the Los Gatos area. But of course, the majority is always white. But you gotta understand, back in the 80s, when I was coming to Los Gatos, it was a cow town. It was a horse town. People would ride their horse up the street, you know. You know, the housing market was, you know, you could still afford a house for $300,000-$400,000. So it was a little bit more hip. Like when I meet original natives of Los Gatos, they're more down to earth. They're more hip, you know. Again, we had the music scene where we were more social. We had the art scene, people going to the theater. People were going to see movies in theaters. We were more social. So yeah, you had your races, but people were still opening doors for one another, saying hi. People were had the gift of gab. They would you know, how's your day? How's it going? You know, people would. It was just more social. There were more opportunities to be social at that time, and because of the tech, because of technology, that has made us a little bit antisocial, very antisocial. It's had an effect on Los Gatos to the point where people don't open doors for one another. They don't say hi. They don't look each other in the eye. There's a lot less, what can I say? It's not, trying to think of the right word. It's not as social. There's not a lot of opportunity for people to, I mean, it's rare for me to sit down and have a conversation with people. Because of COVID-19, people realize that we've taken that ability to be social for granted. So I'll walk down, I used to, remember, I think African Americans, I think less than 6% of Los Gatos. Yeah. And nobody, before COVID-19, nobody would talk to me. Nobody, you know, maybe one or two people. Because of COVID-19, people talk to me all the time now. And I'm like, wait, who are you? You know, I've been coming to this town for decades, and it's just amazing. It's kind of a blessing and a curse. Yeah, COVID-19 is bad, but it's forcing people to actually be more social. It's like, even people you don't like, it's like, you know, I don't like you, but how you doing, man? How you doing? I miss not liking you, man. You know what I mean? So I think, and it's unfortunate because sometimes, again, the racism is still there. The old boys system, there's still an old boys system in Los Gatos, where they'll cater to white people better than they'll cater to people of color. But it's unfortunate because people are people. You know, the guy that you thought was your friend because you were ethnically the same, you might end up getting in a fight with the next week and you're not friends anymore. Or because you cater to white people at your business, when there's a recession and all your friends have to move because they can't afford their houses or they can't afford to shop, the fact that you didn't develop these other market streams of revenue from people of color, you can't survive. And I see a lot of that happening. A lot of these shops are closing because if they would have treated the Chinese better, or the Indians better, or the black people better that could afford, that might have been the minority in Los Gatos at the time when things were booming, they would, when the recession hit, you would have still had that 6% of the population that could have filled in, that could have helped you with the revenue and kind of balanced out everything for you. But they moved out because of the way they treated. They were treated. And they had an opportunity at the boom to move out because they had the means to move out of Los Gatos and get something else, rather than being rather than being treated like second-class citizens and wanting to spend their money in your business when they had the chance, but you ignored them, and so they no longer were your patrons. So it's funny, I've watched that for decades happen, and the white merchants in downtown Los Gatos, they still haven't learned that lesson. So it's changed. It's changed for the worse. You know.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because the town of Los Gatos has become more diverse. Like it has, the population itself is more diverse, but I don't know necessarily the diversity of shop owners, of store owners and stuff. That's not something I know, and so maybe those feelings have.
Or the city council. I mean, how diverse is the city council? You know?
Right. So it's interesting that you say that maybe the attitudes of people maybe haven't even improved at all. They've gotten worse, even though the town itself has gotten more diverse.
Yeah, because there's no, if you socialize around the same people, you're all going to start. There's no dichotomy in thought. You know what I'm saying? There's no reason to change. You get set in your ways.
Yeah, and it's interesting.
There's no, especially if you're wealthy, that's like a false cushion. There's no, how can I say? Why invest in change when you don't have to? Why care about it? It's not affecting you.
Yeah.
And then with when it comes to race, acknowledging white privilege, that means you have to. I'll give you an example. I was at roasting. What is it? The roasting company.
Yeah.
Los Gatos Roasting Company. Now you got people you got old money there. That's like old money. So the patrons are like old money. So they got their $100,000 cars and their $3,000 bikes that they ride with their bike, clothing on, and sitting around talking about this gadget on their back and that gadget on their back. And I walk in there one day, and all the patrons were like, "Oh my God, did you hear? Blah, 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 blah. Oh my God, blah, 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 blah. What did you hear? Oh my God, did you hear this?" Blah. I was like, "What?" I'm thinking, "What? Did the president get shot? What's going on?" And found out that Terry, the owner, raised her price 25 cents, and they were upset. And I was like, "Wait, she hadn't raised her prices in 40 years." Okay? So I'm thinking, what's wrong with this picture? Why are these people who have $3 million homes, $100,000 cars or more, $3,000, $4,000 road bikes, why are they upset about 25-cent increase in the coffee? Because they believe, now listen, I lived on Millionaires Row in Sobe, okay, in Saratoga, where I came outside one day and I waved at a neighbor, and a neighbor waved me over and said, I need to talk to you. And I go, yeah, what's up? Now I was the only black person next to Singletary, who was the coach of the 49ers, who had a black coach, one of the first black coaches, a few black coaches in the NFL, who lived across the street from me with his white wife. Okay, so we were the only two black people on Sobe. So my neighbor waves me over, not Singletary, but a white neighbor waves me over. And I said, yeah, what's up? He goes, you're the first person that waved at me in 20 years. The reason being is they spend their whole lives trying to live the American dream. They get all this huge house, and they take some 5 minutes to get out to the post office, to their mailbox. It takes them 5-10 more minutes to get back to their house, and they never get to know their neighbors, right? So, and that's a problem in the white community itself. And if that's a problem in the white community, just think how hard it is to make the effort to talk to somebody of color, you know? So now, don't get me wrong, the people on Sobe, my neighbor hung himself over his front porch, right? Another neighbor drove his car through his $100,000 steel fence that was closed. The fence flew across the street, could have killed somebody. He could have killed himself driving through that gate. You got neighbors fighting over whose easement, whose property line, digging up each other's lawn with machines, construction machines. And I'm saying to myself, this is the American dream, right? So, and then you got 200 people a day driving by or walking by these mansions going, I wish one day I can live in these kind of homes, right? So then I went back to, why are these people complaining about 25-cent increase in coffee? Because they know the American dream's a lie. It's not happiness. Because here are these people living in these $3-4 million homes who are miserable. But why can't they just tell these people who are walking by their homes, admiring them, the truth? That it's not true. It's not happiness. It's because they can look outside and see these people want to be like me. And that is a confirmation bias that makes them think it's not a lie. I'm not living a lie because these people want to be like me. It's just confirmation bias, right? So that's Los Gatos. It's the same with racism. Same with white privilege. In order to be a part of the system, you have to embrace the power base, which is white males, right? So in order to invest and be successful and to be wealthy, you have to have a certain ideology. You have to accept that ideology and push down your other the ideology of fairness and what's right and all those kind of things for the American dream, which is all about capitalism. That's Los Gatos. You got a guy. We're at the Black Lives Matter protest, but you have all these people on the weekend driving their $100,000 cars down Santa Cruz Street, not doing anything about the problem of race, right? But they're going to drive down because of the Protestant ethic in America that created the economic system in America. That ideology is, if you're wealthy, you're favored by God. So even if you're not Protestant, if you get wealth, you're prideful, because that Protestant ethic is shaped has massaged the minds of everyone, every immigrant that comes to America, right? That's why you have the model minorities in this country. See, you have what is the Asia, the Chinese are considered a model minority, but before the Chinese, we were considered a model minority. We were trying to assimilate, right? We were trying to assimilate so we can be accepted. And then the people that were left in the ghetto, the black people that were left in the ghetto, they were the niggers. They were the lazy ones. We're trying to assimilate. They tricked us. They tricked us because they said, we're going to create a melting pot. We're going to help you break through the glass ceiling. We're going to give you education. We're going to give you a house. We're going to give you this and that. So we believed them. So when we finally got to the glass ceiling and we broke through it, we saw above that was a cement ceiling. Okay, so what they got us doing was, before the Civil Rights Act of 1964, all the money was in the black community. The money circulated. Like when Big Mama, we paid Big Mama to take care of the kids. Then there was somebody to cook for the whole community. We paid her. Oh, Miss Green, can you give me some coleslaw with some ham hocks? People paid her. That was her income. And then when she needed her car fixed, everybody went to Joe's garage up the street, and he got our money. And then the church got the money. And then the mailman, everything was, all the money was intact. The civil rights, it was appeasement. We went out, we took our money out of the black community and gave it to the same white man who was segregating us to sit at his lunch counter. We got tricked. It's a trick.
So I guess, like, how does it, I mean, it's a lot, right? It's deep. How does it feel being in town and working with people in town with all that in mind every day?
You know, you got to be the change. I was telling some people at the protests, or not, they were protesters, but I met some people in the park, and they go, what if we get all this protesting and nothing changes? And I said to them, listen, that's the socialization. Is you think that they have to help you with change. They have to be the ones to make change for you. You're doing all this protesting, and you have yet to realize you're from Australia, you're Vietnamese, you're Japanese, you're American Indian, I'm all races. If we can't help each other, they'll always win, right? They'll always win because we think they're the power. They have to make everything right. No, we're the power. We have to find out there's a common. We have to find out what we have in common, and then help each other. We have to integrate into each other's communities. It's about integration, right? And forming alliances so we can all, like, I met a guy in charge of Los Gatos Foundation, high school foundation, and I said, you have a foundation? Why do you guys need a foundation? You guys go through, your kids go through different tutors every week. It's like tissue paper, right? You guys have pools in your backyards. You have a tax bracket where your schools get so much money. Why do you need a foundation? And he goes, wow, I'm a Catholic, and I just realized that makes no sense. I said, why don't you guys take some of that foundation money and give it to some other schools that need it? Why are we fighting over the same dollars, right? Why don't we come together integrate all these schools and come together and find a common need and go to government, and instead of Los Gatos needs this, Los Altos needs that, Santa Clara County needs that, this county needs this. It's like we only get piecemeal that way. Come together and find out what the common need is and get one big check for everybody. And so, you know, and I work with the police. I work for, I was the first to bring theater to the POST, which is Police Organizational Sensitivity Training. I create workshops for cops. And so when they stop me 6 times a week in Los Gatos, I said, you guys should get to know, first of all, I'm with POST, okay? And then they get all, because POST is, if you mess up on the job, you have to take a POST workshop, right? So I said, you guys should know what percent of Black people are in your own town. And you should get to know that 6%. Because if the thing about the government is, it's not supposed to mean majority wins, take all spoils. Majority is supposed to take care of the minority that loses, right? From the very beginning is, because what happens, the reason why they do that is, you should do that is, and it was in the Constitution, Jefferson practiced that, is because if the minority becomes a majority in the next election, they're going to remember what you did for them, and they're going to take care of you who are now the minority. That's how government's supposed to work, right? And it's the same with Los Gatos. If Los Gatos is the majority, not every white person in Los Gatos is rich, right? So if you don't take care of the poor whites in Los Gatos, you're going to be poor one day and they're not going to take care of you, right? So when I talk to police and they stop me and they go, are you on probation? I'm like, what kind of question is that? And I go, I'm not going to answer that question. I said, you have my license plate, you have a blotter, you can check my history. And I said, would you have said that to a woman in her 90s? No, because she said, the reason I said that was, he said, I say that I ask everybody that. And I go, so you're saying if I was 80 years old, if I was an 80-year-old white woman headed towards downtown Santa Cruz, you would ask her that question if she was on parole? Is she right now? You couldn't answer that. And then I was in front of the Los Gatos, I was on Los Gatos Boulevard sitting in front of Citibank, 9 o'clock at night, and this white woman walks out, comes out of the teller. It's closed. She comes out of the teller and goes to her car and leaves. 20 minutes later, I get a cop knocking on my window of my car. And mind you, I'm right across the street from the brand new Los Gatos Police Department on Saratoga Avenue, right next to Whole Foods. He goes, sir, I got a call about a Black man in a car in front of the bank. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I'm a Black man in a car in front of a bank. So what's the problem? And he's like, and he starts looking for a problem in my car. Like, is there a light out or is there a broken taillight? You know, he starts looking around for an excuse because he realized what a stupid situation that woman put him in. And then I recognized the cop. I go, I know you. He goes, you know me? I go, yeah, there's what is that hardware store on Los Gatos Boulevard? Ace Hardware, and there's a laundromat there. I used to go to that laundromat, and one night I went in there, and somebody had broken into the change machine. There were hundreds of dollars of coins on the ground. So I called the cops. I said, hey, there's like hundreds of dollars of coins on the ground. You might want to send a cop out here. You know what cop it was? That cop that stopped me in front of the bank. I said, man, you got the wrong guy. So I said, because I didn't try to humiliate him or make him look like a fool, and he respected me for that. He's like, yeah, he was like, yeah, I didn't think about the dispatch. I didn't think about the dispatch. Because that's the problem between the dispatch, depending if the dispatcher's racist, and they say there's a Black man, she might dispatch a certain type of call. And if that cop hears that he may not be racist, but here's the dispatch, which sounds like, oh, there's this angry black man sitting in the car and he's going to rob the bank. He might go to the dispatch with that frame of mind and judge me accordingly and treat me accordingly. Or maybe they're both, the cop and the dispatcher, are kind of have racist tendency, and that may cause me to have a situation that may be something that he brings to my door. It's just like he's already judged me before he opened it up. I open up the window. So when it comes to, and I've talked to the sheriff of Los Gatos, and he goes, I go, why do I got stopped 6 times, man, in 1 week? Well, it's my police officers are bored. And I was like, have them play chess or checkers, man. If they're bored, don't stop me every day, you know? So, yeah. That's a long way around the question that you asked me. But.
No, but it's good to know because
Yes.
it's an experience not a lot of people would believe happens.
Oh.
Mostly white people would
and
believe
I think, yeah, and I think that when it comes to what, I think it goes back to your question, which is, and the question I have with those people, it's like, I have to be the change I want to see, right? So if somebody's treating me like a nigger, and I still smile, and I still open up the door for them, I'm not trying to change them, right? I don't waste my energy on trying to change somebody because they may never change. I have to be the change I want to see. I have to walk into a world and live the world and live and be the best person I can be, right? And then because when you enter an environment, the second you enter that environment, it changes because of you. The way you walk around people, the way you, right? So no matter what I do, being the only black person in all the schools that I went to, from middle school to high school to college, no matter the minute I enter into that environment, I've already changed it. So I have a responsibility that when I go to Los Gatos, I don't become part of the problem. I become part of the solution, right? So the minute I enter into that environment in Los Gatos, I'm gonna be the person. I'm gonna be the best person I could be, right? And by being the best person I can be an example for others, right? Even those that hate me, like those that yell at me I was at one of the June 5th protests where this white older guy and his white patron and his Asian friend started yelling at us saying, fuck you, white lives matter, all lives matter, fuck you, white lives matter. I was like, okay, let me go shut this down. I didn't yell at him. I told the kids, because kids, you know, they're emotional. So they're gonna what can I say? They're gonna be triggered. So I said, you guys focus on your message, focus on the march, because that's what you're here for. And then to my left was Father David. And we kind of, I guess he teaches at the Presbyterian Church on Los Gatos Boulevard. He was right next to me. And I said, we kind of locked eye to eye, and we kind of had the same frame of mind. Let's stay calm. Because if these guys that come here to trigger these kids, to bait them into an argument, to distract them from their message and their march. So me and Father teamed up, stayed calm, told the kids, go back to their refocus, go back to what you're doing, we got this. And the second me and the Father, we didn't say a word, we just got in front of those two guys, and they had nothing to feed off of, because we weren't going to take their bait, and they totally walked away. And then as we marched down Santa Cruz Avenue, those guys, those two All Lives Matters guys, they were trying to find a crack where they can get in and get after a kid again. And then we would see that, and we'd walk up to them and stand right in front of them, not say a word, stay calm. And they had nothing to feed off of, and they were able to accomplish their march, finish their speeches. So that's what I'm talking about. Look what we did just by being in that presence. Look what it had an effect on those kind of people. You know what I'm saying? And so that's what I'm saying. You got to be the change you want to see. You know?
That's very powerful. Thank you for sharing that. And we're so glad that you're here in Los Gatos, and you're being true to yourself, and you know how you want to positively impact the community with, you know, teaching martial arts and being an artist and sharing your story here too. So we're very, very grateful and honored to be speaking with you today.
Okay, likewise.
Yeah. Is there anything else that Daniel, that you wanted to ask for the interview, or Lynel, that you wanted to share with us during this time?
Yeah, I don't have specific questions. If there's anything you want to share about your life that you want recorded and included, now's a good time. I know we've gone about an hour and a half or so, so at a certain point it starts to get
time flies.
A lot of energy. Yeah.
Just that I just wanted to add to that last story. The next day I met the Asian guy walking into a restaurant that I was just hanging out at the front of. And I go, hey, you're the guy that was at the rally the other day saying all lives matter and flipping all the kids off. I said, do you know there were families there? There were little kids, 4 or 5 years old. And I go, did you know that? He goes, no, I didn't know that. And I said, did you look at my t-shirt that I was wearing? And he goes, no, my teacher said executive order 5069. And it was the executive order to intern the Japanese. I think I got the number wrong right now, but I think it's 9006. And yeah. And he says, I go, what ethnicity are you? He goes, I'm Japanese. So let me give you a scenario. Let's say you're in an internment camp and somebody from the outside, a white person, comes up to you at the gate on the outside of the internment camp. You're hanging out there as a kid, or your grandparents. And they look at your grandparents, they walk up to the fence and they look at your grandparents right in their eyes and they go, all lives matter. How would you have felt if somebody did that to you, right? How would you have felt? And I had another person, a shop owner, who owned a bar on Santa Cruz Avenue, and he goes, I don't know why he started talking to me, because I guess he thought it was because I was black. That was all Black Lives Matter. He goes, hush, so what's going on? So you Black Lives Matter, huh? I go, well, what are you I'm thinking in my head, what is he talking about? Black Lives Matter. Oh, I'm black. Okay, so he thinks I'm all Black Lives Matter. I'm for Black Lives Matter. Okay, I get it. So then he goes, do you know your history? And I go, yeah, what history are you talking about? You know what happened to the Germans after the Second World War? I mean, after the First World War? I go, what is he talking about Germans for? And I go, oh, I get it. So, okay, yeah, they were devastated. The Germany was destroyed. Yeah, I get it. Yeah. He goes, see, all lives matter. I'm like, okay, let me think about this. So I went home, I started thinking, what if it was after World War I and me being a black guy, and I'm thinking, what if his grandfather or great-grandfather was standing on all the rubble of Germany, tired, hungry, and I walked up to his grandfather and I said, looked him right in his eye and I said, Black Lives Matter. How do you think he would have felt? So it's not about Black Lives Matter, all lives matter. It's like, can you just give me a hug, man? I'm hurting right now. That's all it's about. And I think people are afraid to feel our pain. It's hard. It's hard for people to feel another person's pain, because in order to feel another pain, to have empathy for someone else, you have to understand your own pain. They don't know what to say, so they say all lives matter. They can't empathize because they can't deal with their own shit, their own pain. That's why they have no empathy. They're just covering up the pain of their own lives. And so they can't face us. They can't face this because they can't empathize because they can't get in touch with their own self-loathing and shame and pain. That's what it's all about. And so that's why I have to be all loving and all caring and empathize. That's as an artist. If the best artists like a James Dean or Marlon Brando can embrace their own humanity. Okay, so as an artist, if I'm going to be a great artist that can move, because I do speeches, I do my poems at the marches, and because I can empathize, that I'm working on being an artist that embraces his own humanity. When I say my poems, it moves people. Because I'm not just talking about the black experience. I'm talking about the human experience. So that's a lot of where my stories come from. Is I struggled to embrace my own humanities so I can empathize with others and help others. We can't help others if we can't embrace our own humanity. And that's what I bring to Los Gatos when I come to work, when I drive through there, when I eat at establishments, and I do documentaries. Right now I'm interviewing the patrons about their origin story, their immigrant story, so I can get those stories back to, because I'm all about communication and building bridges of communication. Because the protesters say, oh, they boarded up the windows, they don't care about us, they don't trust us. And I said, well, let me find out about if they trust you guys and your plight. And so I interviewed a lot of the patrons in the marches and the people from the marches. And I said, you guys have the same origin story. You're talking about the same thing. You're just not communicating. Because they're family-owned businesses. They came, their families were immigrants. They dealt with racism. They had their own struggles here. You know, like Pedro's, that guy. I met him. I met the person that owns flights. He has his own story. I mean, it's like the same story. And these kids are just telling their story right now. It's like, no, this story's happened to everyone. Your story has happened to everyone. So, yeah, it's great. Great talk. Thanks.
No, thank you.
Thank you.
It's powerful to hear that, and it's powerful to kind of have that call to action for everybody, regardless of who you are, to bring that compassion day to day. And I think that is super possible, especially. Yeah. Yeah,
I mean, when I moved from East Palo Alto to Palo Alto, I thought all white people were bad. But no, good white people helped me. Good white people. There's good and bad, and there's bad black people that do harm in the black community. And there's good black people. There's good and bad and indifferent in every community. And if I had to move to a white neighborhood, I wouldn't have known a Mrs. Hinckley that cared enough about me to help me be a great artist. I wouldn't have known people that taught me what grits were. Like, what's grits? You gotta come over, have breakfast with us. We'll feed you some grits and tell you how to make grit. Put some sugar in it, put a little butter in it, maybe put some bacon in it. It's like I would have known what grits were run for white people. You know what I mean? So there's good and bad in every community and indifferent in every community. And if it wasn't for me being the only black person in white communities, I wouldn't have seen the good and the bad and the ugly and indifferent in the white community. So, you know, like I said, it's good, bad, ugly, and indifferent in every community. So, you know, that gives me hope. Hope for Los Gatos.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think I'll stop recording if that works.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.